David French, welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me.
And we have you in person, incarnate.
I'm here. You exist.
You exist. Sometimes I wonder.
This is so much better than Zoom.
So you're in Wheaton to do some stuff at the college.
I am.
And we took advantage of your presence.
It's not taking advantage. I was super happy to do
Oh, that's
this.
very kind of you say. And
maybe exploit is the right word.
that voice you're hearing is Phil Vischer.
What?
Welcome to French Friday,
What?
Phil.
I've never been here before.
You never have.
What is this? How long have you guys been doing this?
I started to think you didn't care.
Oh.
Oh, David.
I'm sorry.
David, how could you say that?
I'm so sorry.
Of course he cares. Here's the theme song.
Guess what day it is? Oh, it's French Friday, it's French Friday, so grab your fries and say hooray! David French is here to play on French Friday. It's French Friday.
All right.
What a great theme song.
It's a brilliant theme song.
Oh, my goodness.
In a way, Phil, you're here every week. Because
in a
of the
very
song.
tangible way, moving, emotionally resonant. Okay.
Someday we'll release a
You can go on.
DVD
But
album
this is
of all your theme songs.
this is U2's thing.
And you're just going to pop
Is
in.
twos the plural of, or the possessive of
I think two is plural
Is it
already.
Is it you twos or use two?
used to? I used to think this was your thing, but now I think it's U2's
I think
thing.
it's the actual appropriate grammar is the only double contraction in the English language. Y'alls.
Yeah, this
Y'alls.
is y'all's thing.
Y'alls.
Yeah, this is y'all's.
Y'all would be super helpful in
Which
Bible
would then have
translations.
2 apostrophes in it. Y'all's possessive.
Yeah.
Of course. Okay, can we move on to something that people are
I
actually
like
tuning
being
in
on
for?
French Friday.
Yeah, clearly. You need to get
It's
on your...
already the best one.
Okay, so David, I want to talk to you about a piece you wrote in The Atlantic, which is based on some data that came out of Lifeway and Legionnaire
Yeah.
Ministries?
Legionnaire.
Legionnaire?
Yeah.
Hard G, soft G?
Because it's not the disease.
It could be, given the data they uncovered.
Yeah, I guess so.
So they do an annual survey of evangelicals and their doctrine and beliefs. Now, I don't know if we want to spend time getting into what exactly is an evangelical, which is a hairy mess that you uncover, you get into on the piece. We've talked about it a lot on past Holy Posts, like how you define evangelical is very, very squishy.
Yeah.
But the big thing they did come away with is there's a whole lot of heretics who identify as evangelical. So give us your initial, when you read the survey results, what kind of jumped out to you front and center?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I did when I saw the survey results, because they were pretty shocking in some ways, was actually then say, how did they define evangelical? Because that really matters to what we're going to talk about.
It does.
Because if you're going to say it's just a group of self-identified evangelicals, then I'm sort of less concerned about that theology, because I know that includes a ton of people, many who don't go to church at all. So we've seen all that research that a majority of self-described evangelicals in the U.S. go to church once a month or less.
Right.
But this wasn't that. They had a 4-part test for evangelicals, and that 4-part test kind of weeded out like the squishes, the casual Christians. And so this is people who actually not just say they're evangelical, but assented to some pretty important sort of theological propositions.
Here's those 4 parts, just so we're tracking. The Bible is the highest authority for what I believe. It is very important for me to encourage non-Christians to trust Jesus Christ as their Savior. Jesus Christ's death on the cross is the only sacrifice that could remove the penalty of my sin. And 4th, only those who trust in Jesus Christ alone as their Savior receive God's free gift of eternal salvation.
Right.
So that's the parameters in the survey of who is an evangelical.
Right.
Okay.
And so that's what makes everything that follows so concerning/interesting. So even amongst this group, a majority of them don't even really know who Jesus is. So a majority in this group were saying that Jesus is sort of the first and greatest created being. In other words, Jesus created by God. Not in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's more in the beginning there was God, and God made Jesus, which is a very different conception of who Jesus is.
It's a very old heresy.
It's a very old heresy held by a majority. In addition, there was a very significant minority who didn't even really see Jesus as God at all. And so that, you had amongst the self-described group of evangelicals selected non-squishes who don't understand who Jesus is. And that
You think that might be a problem?
This is a big problem. And what was fascinating to me, So again, you cannot say this is like Squish Nation here. 94%, I believe, agreed with the statement that, you know, sex outside of traditional marriage is a sin. 90+% believe that abortion is a sin. Those are numbers way outside of sort of the average American. So these are non-Squish evangelicals with very doctrinaire views on sexual morality who didn't know the nature of Jesus. And so what I tried to explain is why is that a problem? That's a problem. Why is it a problem?
So I was thinking when I read this, I thought back to my high school experience. I graduated in 1994. So early 90s, I was a part of a youth ministry, would go to big youth rallies in Chicago.
With your puppets.
No, that came later.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, just like you.
That was later than high school?
Well, like end of my senior year.
Oh, okay.
I was one unnaturally born
you
into
were.
puppetry.
Yeah.
Is anyone naturally born into puppetry?
His wife.
Okay.
His
Yeah,
wife.
she was born into it. For sure.
His wife's mother led a puppet ministry.
Yeah.
And so when they started dating, he got sucked into it
Obviously, I had ulterior motives.
by trying to please the mother, future mother-in-law.
Right. Anyway, back on track. I'm thinking, would I, at say 18 years old, would have answered these doctrinal questions correctly, or would my peers have answered these doctrinal questions correctly? I would like to think I would have, because I'm smarter than the average bear. But I'm pretty sure most of my peers would not.
Where would that knowledge have come from at that age?
Well,
for you?
I was earlier than most people very inquisitive about my faith and what I believed and why. So I was reading Lewis and I was reading all kinds of weird stuff in high school. But I'm pretty sure every one of my peers would have answered the sexual ethics questions very concretely and definitively. So even 30 years ago,
that's what was important.
That's right. Everyone had it drilled into them that if you are a Christian, these are the boundaries of your sexual behavior. And all, whether it's Arianism or Trinitarian theology, that's whatever. But you better not cross these lines.
Right.
Don't touch those parts.
That's right.
Right.
Well,
you can touch heresy, but don't touch those parts.
Well, one of the things is this is part of the product of the obsession with line drawing. So you have this country that is still majority Christian. In other words, a majority identifies Christian. And so lots of churches have been really interested in exploring who's really Christian and who's not really Christian for a long time. And I'm the same as you. I grew up in a Southern, very conservative / fundamentalist youth group, and nobody had any doubt at all about sexual morality, but mass confusion about sort of fundamental theological realities and conceptions of the Christian faith. And I was talking to somebody about this just today, and I was saying, I grew up understanding the gospel in large part because of my parents. But my wife, she grew up in the same denomination that I did, and she had never heard the gospel fully presented until I presented it to her when we were dating. And you would think, how is that remotely possible? How is it remotely? But then you can start to think about, for example, if you go to a lot of churches now, your sermon series is going to be on parenting, and then it's going to be on career, and then it's going to be on, topical things. Or when you're in a youth group, a lot of youth group is sort of, here's this fun thing we all do together as Christians. Here are the moral rules, here Christians don't do X, Y, and Z. How many times do people sort of sit down and say, in the beginning, ...
Do you think, and Sky, do you think this is true? Do you think most pastors are pretty sure they covered that already?
Probably, or they assume parents and households are covering that.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. Like, even in the 4 points that are listed in this survey that identify someone as an evangelical, or even the popular way that I heard the gospel as a college student elsewhere, like, the deity of Jesus is not essential in the way it's popularly presented.
True.
Because it's Jesus died for my sins on the cross, but does that mean he's uncreated?
And he's God's son. We focus
Right.
on he's God's son.
Right.
God sent his only son. Sons are not eternal.
Right. So there's a lot of assumption, even in the stuff we are presenting.
And also, one of the things if you've ever been involved in teaching at all, repetition is key. It is not the case, and this is something...
Say that again, Dave.
Repetition is key.
Okay.
So cheap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheap.
And when you're writing and you're trying to inject ideas into the bloodstream, one of the challenges is, how do I say the same thing differently so that regular readers are not bored, but at the same time, new readers are engaging with an idea? This is a long time challenge. And so I think that one of the things that we have to do is maybe hammer in these eternal truths about Jesus with as much emphasis or more emphasis and more repetition than you hammer in, because it's not the case that I went to youth group and only one time, orientation freshman year, don't have sex until you're married, and then that was that.
Right. It was drilled over and over and over.
Drilled and drilled and drilled. And what are the tactics and what are the strategies? And here's, is a omnipresent topic.
Okay, so that relates to research done years ago by Kara Powell. Do you know Kara at Fuller Youth Institute?
Yes.
She's been on numerous times. She's a good friend. She's written brilliantly about this. So if I'm recalling some of the data they uncovered, they studied high school and post-high school students and how many of them stuck with the faith after graduating high school. And I think it was 50% or something ended up walking away from their faith within 18 months of graduating high school. And then they looked at, well, what was true of the students who left and those who stayed? And one of the markers was those who believed that their faith, the metaphor she uses is your faith is a set of behaviors that you wear. And if you fail in those behaviors, then you can't be a Christian anymore. And of course, the most critical behavior is sexual purity, right? And so what they found is students who stayed with the faith and walked away struggled equally with sexual purity issues. But the ones who believed that that was central to the faith ended up walking away from it. Whereas those who understood, this is something I'm called to, but I can still struggle with this and follow Jesus, stayed with the faith. So between the lines of the report, what scares me is we are essentially inoculating people to the gospel, because when they invariably do struggle with sexual issues, they're going to conclude, I can't be a Christian.
Right. And this is the root, I think, and this is something I want to write about. This is a root, I think, of a lot of deconstruction.
Yep.
So if you have advertised Christianity as it is a set of behaviors, it's a code of behaviors, and again, this is something you just see online. The fact that I'm not saying that Christianity is centered around sexual morality does not mean that I abandoned sexual morality. But the idea that you present Christianity as sexual morality or as any set of moral codes, and that is the thing, when you then encounter a Christian church, which is going to be riddled with people who are struggling with sexual morality, or they're struggling with alcohol, or they're struggling with drugs, or they're struggling with greed, or all of these sins, and that's the thing, it's no wonder people deconstruct. Like, what is there then? What is this thing then? If it's this collection of people who say, faith is me doing or not doing A, B, C, and D, and then I spend 10 minutes here and I see a lot of A, B, C, and D, then what is this place? And I think that is a source of sort of that deconstruction mindset.
It's a 12-step group where everyone's still on step 2.
Right. And the thing that's deceptive about it is you put somebody on a polygraph, who's teaching this sort of moralized view, 90% of them are going to say, oh, I'm not legalistic. I'm not legalistic.
I've never met a legalist.
No, never met a confessor.
Or a racist.
No,
right.
They don't exist.
No.
Yeah. But what is it, you're defined by, much more what you spend your time on than sort of internally how you label yourself. And if you're just spending all of this time drawing these lines, and you especially see this all over sort of conservative Christian commentary, where the real ones are going to stand up on sexual morality. Now, that's not super consistent, because the real ones are also supposed to support a president who was in a Playboy movie, but that's different because reasons.
Well, he wasn't a Christian yet.
Okay.
He was a baby.
He was a baby Christian.
He was still in utero.
You got the baby part right. There's another part of this, though, that I want to talk about. It's one thing to say a bunch of evangelicals don't have any idea who Jesus is or any of these core doctrines of the faith, and they have centralized sexual morality. Why haven't they emphasized other areas of Christian ethics, like love your neighbor, or help the
fruit
poor,
of the Spirit?
So why is it all what I call crotch Christianity, which is that center of the universe.
Center of gravity is from the navel to the knees.
Right.
Yeah,
and everything else
Christianity.
is superfluous.
Well, I mean, there's part of it is because in a lot of ways that's sort of a central focus of our culture more broadly. So, yeah, we live in a very sexualized culture, and a ton of that sexuality is contrary to biblical guidelines. And so there's going to be a countercultural aspect to Christianity in a hypersexualized culture. But then when you overlay on top of that politics, when you overlay on top of that our own sort of tendency to internally try to line draw within the church, all of that comes together to create this kind of toxic stew that says, okay, because the world is emphasizing sexuality so much, we have to emphasize sexuality so much.
Yeah, it made me wonder, if you go back to the 1920s, if there were youth groups in the 1920s, what were they emphasizing then when there was an assumption that that chastity was the goal? You know, and is really
the whole culture did.
Yeah, right. So it was the 1980s when we started to obsess with abstinence and, you know, pushing against the culture. Is it really just, are we just reactionary all the time, and we're reacting to the 60s?
A huge part of it is reaction. Now, and one of the things that you know, I think conservatives are prone to this, and people on the right are prone to this, is whatever my opponents are emphasizing, I'm going to emphasize from the opposite perspective, rather than saying, okay, they might be unbalanced in their view of X or Y or Z. My alternative is not to be counter unbalanced. It's to present the sort of the holistic view.
Right.
And the thing that I talk about in the piece is, look, when you center around Jesus, that is the opposite of moral license, right? That's, if you compare yourself to Jesus, that is a humbling thing. I mean, and it's not, I mean, on so many fronts, like, what kind of person am I compared to Jesus Christ? That's kind of a shattering comparison. So that is, it's not like, now I'm going to recenter around Jesus. Anything goes. It's, I'm going to recenter around Jesus, and God forgive me, I'm a sinner. And then,
and if you look at, you know, if you go down the fruit of the Spirit, and you say, these are supposed to be appearing in my life, and look, self-control is one of them. And the most important thing is love of God and love of neighbor. So how do I show love for this girl that I like and demonstrate self-control? And you get to a sexual ethic without having to start at a sexual ethic.
Right, exactly.
I think I just figured it all out. Thank you. Good night. Drive safe.
Who are you waving to?
The audience.
Oh, right.
The audience.
Okay,
Julie and Jason are sitting here. That's our audience today. Okay, so
This will be on YouTube.
Oh, that's
and
true.
there will
That's
be
true.
people looking at your smiling mug.
some time ago, I had this really disheartening conversation with a church leader who was of significant influence. And I was talking to him about what would qualify or disqualify.
Was it Rick Warren?
No. What would qualify or disqualify a pastor from leadership? And I said, you know, if a pastor is struggling significantly with sexual purity, the answer came really quick. Oh, yeah, we would remove that
They're
person
out.
immediately. Even if they confessed to it, even if they wanted, you know, there wasn't, let's say he hadn't actually committed adultery, whatever. It's just,
they touched the third rail.
Exactly, they're gone. And then I asked, well, what about a pastor who is proven to be utterly biblically and theologically illiterate? Who is just spouting off stuff from the pulpit that is not consistent with the faith or the scriptures. And this leader said, well, we would get that person help. We would get them the assistance they need to learn and grow. I'm like, really? Like, that's a significant position of influence, but it kind of emphasizes this idea, well, doctrine, we're not super concerned about that, but darn it, you've got to keep your sexual boundaries super tight.
Well, you know, and the other thing that is kind of perverse about all of this is that when you sort of emphasize a sin as sort of the sin, it has an effect of making that sin sort of that more alluring and mysterious. It's the law, it's old concept that the law provokes.
Right.
And so it creates these taboos, and it creates this sort of obsession.
That's the meaning of forbidden fruit.
Exactly, exactly. So this is the forbidden fruit, and then all of a sudden people are like, that fruit looks pretty nice. And I mean, we all have a sin nature, and we're inclined to always kind of look around at the various kinds of forbidden fruit and go, oh, tasty. But when you put the one there and you say, this is the thing, you know, there's a part of that perversely enough starts to make it more salient in the community's life.
If every youth group meeting starts out with "Don't think about elephants," every youth group kid's going to be thinking about elephants.
So what we need to do is start every youth group meeting with, "Don't you dare go down the road of Arianism."
Don't think about Arianism.
Don't think about it. Okay, so taking a step back, other data that's come out in recent months has shown that for a lot of evangelicals, they define themselves increasingly culturally and politically, not theologically, not historically orthodox in any sort of way. And this survey comes out and says that they really define themselves morally, sexually morally. So when you put all that together, we're beginning to get a picture of American evangelicalism that is kind of really, really drawn to Christian nationalism, to rabidly conservative politics, to owning the libs, to a sort of ethnocentrism and sexual purity. That doesn't feel like a group that most people would want to be a part of, as far as...
I think it's doing quite well.
Yeah, well, but I would say it's doing well as an ideological movement. I would say that that ideological movement is marked by hypocrisy and their personal conduct. If you go, you know, some of these new right gatherings, for example, especially of young new right sort of Trump era conservatives, it's like you could hold them up side by side and say frat party or new right, you know, new right convention. And you'd kind of have a hard time distinguishing. And, you know, one of the things, I mean, CPAC, some of these other, you know, TPUSA student conferences where you've had women in bikinis firing money into a crowd. And,
and someone standing in the crowd and saying, when can we start shooting?
And TPUSA, so TPUSA, which had this women in bikinis firing money in the crowd, now has a TPUSA faith. Okay.
So they're nuns shooting cannons full of money?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of what's happening in the new right is actually pretty decadent. There's a lot of decadence.
That's the other, you made the very valid point that we have a hypersexualized culture, and part of the church is reacting to that.
It's going to be counterculture.
We also have a profoundly materialistic culture, but I don't see the church reacting to that nearly as much. We're not talking about poverty and distribution of wealth and caring for those with less. Like, that's not a central moral element that we're picking up in this data.
Not nearly as much. I mean, and again, so then what you do, if you're not centering Jesus, which is, I said in the piece, extremely humbling but hopeful at the same time, because I can't stack up to Jesus, but Jesus paid the debt. Humbling and hopeful. What ends up happening when you're emphasizing selective items of morality is that creates arrogance and division. So you've subcategorized. Well, here are the real sins. I'm good on those. I'm good on those. But then anybody with half a brain can look and go, well, what about if you're great on A, B, and C, but isn't there a D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and you're kind of really not great on that. So why are you so prideful?
Well, even if they think they've kept their sexual ethics within the boundaries, this is exactly Jesus' point in the Sermon on the Mount. Even the man who's looked lustfully on a woman has committed adultery in his heart. So don't be so proud of the fact that you
even of that.
Exactly. So no one gets off scot-free here.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It does build this hierarchy, this sense of superiority and self-righteousness.
I mean, think about the culture you see online of sort of what's called Theo Bros or whatever. If you're going to read like Theo Bro Twitter, or you're going to read sort of Christian nationalist literature, is it sort of reeking of the fruit of the Spirit? No, no. And the absolute cruelty poured out upon people like Beth Moore or Russell Moore or others who are dissenters from sort of a mainstream political view within a denomination, just the vitriol. And then they're going to hold themselves out and say, look to me as sort of the guide, the moral and theological guide. Well, have you read like Galatians? And shouldn't you be repenting here for the cruelty that you've displayed, for the lies that you tell, for the deceptions that you spread? but you got it right on sexual morality, and that's going to do what? That's not the blood of Jesus.
Well, maybe we should wrap up here, but I think that the Theo Bros is a good example because I think a lot of those people, at least the more well-known ones, probably have very orthodox theology.
Super.
Right? So there's the other side of it, is even when you get your doctrinal ducks in a row,
Of course.
if the fruit of the Spirit's not there, big whoop. I mean, again, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says, many will come to me in that day and say, Lord, Lord, did we not preach in your name and cast out demons and do mighty works? And he says, away from me, I never knew you. So just having right doctrine in and of itself is not sufficient either. It's that life in communion with Christ, that centering of Jesus so that his life is revealed through you and the fruit of the Spirit. That's what makes the difference. So it feels like we can err on either side.
Oh, for sure.
It's all about sexual morality or it's all about right doctrine, and it's all about Jesus.
Yeah. Well, that's why, centering around knowing Jesus, that humility that comes with it of like, gosh, I fall short, and consistently through Scripture, we see when somebody's exposed to God, they're like, I am undone, I fall short. But then that incredible hope, the hope, that atonement, that incredible, marvelous hope is such a contrast to the pride in your morality or the pride in your theology, where you can say, I have achieved A, B, C, or D, and therefore, and that leads to the pride and that leads to the division.
Should we move on to the next
Yeah,
topic?
move on.
Okay.
Move on. Let's go. This is fun.
What's the next one?
But
You said you had a provocative question.
Oh,
do have
should we do
a provocative
Want to do
question.
that? Or is that like a little snippet?
It leads into some of this.
Okay, well, you
Okay.
lead this.
Did you follow everything that happened at the National Conservative Conference?
I did not attend,
Yeah.
but I followed a lot of it, yeah.
Yeah, and just some of the quotes, Al Mohler saying, closing it out by saying, insofar as conservatism as a movement has a future, it is a future that is going to be increasingly tied to explicit theological claims. That was his closing statement. He said that the woke religion that is raising itself up as the official state ideology, so we have to oppose that by being theological, more theological in our conservatism. Josh Hawley said, without the Bible, there is no modernity. Without the Bible, there is no America. I submit to you that what the left is after is our real inheritance, the Bible. What they particularly dislike about America is our dependence on biblical teaching.
Okay, we just saw the data that most Christians don't even believe what's in the Bible. So what is he? I mean,
Rod Dreher was there. He spoke. He said, I firmly believe that we American Christians, and in truth, Americans of any traditional faith, are now living in exile. We don't know how much time we have before the starts, but we can be confident that it is likely to come. The persecution is coming.
How come we can't be confident in God's presence with us no matter what comes? Isn't that like the rest of the statement? Shouldn't that be the? I don't.
Yeah. So the group, they signed a statement that said the Bible should be taught as the source of shared Western civilization in schools and universities, and
The Godfather by Mario
and
Puzo.
that state power should be used to bring about these ends. That we need to reject the Reaganism of small government and not using the government to solve problems, and embrace a new conservatism of using, and then Ron DeSantis gets up and speaks and says, look at me, I took it to Disney, I took it to the sports team. What did he do? He wouldn't let, which sports team in Florida was going to build a practice facility with some state funds, but they had just...
Oh, I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten who did that.
Yeah, they had... he blocked funding for a new Tampa Bay Rays training facility because of the team's social activism. They had just donated to a gun safety advocacy group.
Yeah.
Shame on them.
Is this okay? Is this conservatism? And a couple of things. Should we stop trying to figure out what conservatism is and just try to walk in the way of Jesus? And a couple other things. I'm going to give you one more question. Okay. We talked on the podcast a couple of weeks ago about a rather provocative point of view about evangelicalism. that there were phases of evangelicalism, but they're so defined by American culture that it's a legitimate question to say, is evangelicalism nothing more than what Christianity looks like in America on any given day? And if so, is there really no such thing as evangelicalism apart from American culture? So I want to turn that around and talk about conservatism and say, if conservatism is just whatever the group that's, kicking against the goads or pushing against the elites is promoting that day, is there such a thing as conservatism?
Oh boy, that's a lot. So
yes, thank you.
So the answer is what is conservatism, or is there such a thing as conservatism? I'm asking that question all the time myself. Okay.
Okay.
So
so every time we ask what is evangelicalism, you're asking what is conservatism.
So it depends on how nerdy you are. A person is if someone tries to ask me what is sort of my ideology. So if I'm going to get super nerdy and precise, I'm going to say I'm a pro-life classical liberal.
Okay.
Okay. Well, that would have marked me as a conservative in years past, which, a view of limited government, a view of the inherent dignity of man, the sort of the founding principles of we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, checks and balances, protections of individual liberty. A lot of the right is saying no to that. So when you were talking to me, I promise I wasn't texting. I was pulling up on my phone the text of the National Conservative Statement on God and Religion.
Okay.
This is good.
Let's hear this. Let's hear this.
So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll get to the big parts.
I might have to throw up if you do.
Where a Christian majority exists, public life should be rooted in Christianity and its moral vision, which should be honored by the state and other institutions, both public and private. At the same time, Jews and other religious minorities are to be protected in the observance of their own tradition, in the free governance of their communal institutions, and in all matters pertaining to the rearing and education of their children. Adult individuals should be protected from religious or ideological coercion in their private lives and in their homes.
Oh.
What about their public lives?
Yeah.
So what you're talking about here is a rejection in many fundamental ways of sort of the classical liberal vision of the founding, and an embrace of the religious supremacy of a different strand of American history.
Put another way, you're talking about a rejection of the Constitution.
Yes.
I don't understand how these people can...
That's how bad things have gotten.
Well, they can present themselves as the champions of the country and champions of the Constitution when they are explicitly wanting to dismantle it.
Yeah. So if you look at American history, and we are very familiar with this story when it comes to race. So when it comes to race, you had slavery, and then you had the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence is a set of principles that contradicts slavery, right? And so over the course of several hundred years, it took us that much time to bring the laws of the land in conformity with the principles of the Declaration and the text of the Constitution. That was harmonizing and it's still an imperfect thing.
Right. It's an aspirational document
It's an aspirational document that we're still aspiring to
form a more perfect union.
What a lot of national conservatives forget is the same principle applies to American religious liberty. That American religious liberty, the aspirational statements of, say, the founding documents, the actual language of the First Amendment, for a long time, America didn't match up to that. What you had was, and Ross Douthat has used this term, a soft establishment of Protestantism. And I would say a soft establishment of white Protestantism, because black Protestants did not feel like they had an established religion. And so, even going into the early 20th century, you had Blaine amendments all over America, 37 states that had anti-Catholic state amendments. You had the black Protestant church relentlessly facing persecution. And so the aspirational ideas of American religious liberty didn't start to come into fruition really, truly until much more recently. And so what they're essentially wanting to do is say, a lot of that religious, sort of that legal equality that people of various faiths have enjoyed in a kind of historical blip in American history, that's not good. Let's go back. But here's what they're neglecting, or maybe they're not neglecting it. They know this will happen and hope to come out on top. As soon as you establish a doctrine of Christian religious supremacy, that's not ecumenical. It's then which strand of Christianity. And we're already seeing, if you follow these things closely, and God bless you if you do, that you have patience, is that there's a break between the Protestant theonomist types and the Catholic integralists already. And there was a fight between Yoram Mazani, on one of the organizers of NatCon, and some of the Catholic post-liberals that broke out on Twitter, because some of the Catholic post-liberals who were at the original NatCon weren't at this new one, and they're going to have a competing event at another university. And so as soon as you establish Christian supremacy, you start fighting.
That you want religious wars?
Yeah,
exactly.
Now you're going to have religious
so
wars.
much of the American founding generation looked across the ocean at Europe and all of the chaos that had unfolded there for centuries, and religious wars and disagreement. And that's why they created a secular federal government, in order to create space and opportunity for people of diverse faiths. And one of my favorite stories, and I've told this, I think, on one of our Getting Schooled episodes, is about the Constitutional Convention, where everyone was at, loggerheads about different controversies, and no one was getting anywhere. Benjamin Franklin, the senior statesman, stands up and says, we should invite ministers to come in every morning to pray for our efforts here. And the convention resoundingly voted down that proposal. They did not want any ministers coming in and praying as they were writing the Constitution. And the reason, I think it was Madison who ended up writing down the notes why, they were already divided by so many issues. They didn't want to be divided over, well, which minister and which denomination and which church. They said, we're just going to leave religion out. And if that was true 250 years ago, it's still true today.
Yeah.
You can't just say we're going to be, and even the data we saw in the previous story, the majority of evangelicals don't even hold Orthodox Christian beliefs. So are they the ones who are going to pick what's Christian in this country?
Well, and the other thing is, if you're saying that we want Christian influence in the United States, I have good news for you. One of the most important voting blocs in all of America, on both the Democratic and Republican side, are Bible-believing Christians. So you have the white evangelical voting bloc, goes to church more than the average American, says they believe in the Bible. They're the foundation of the Republican Party. Democrats try winning without black Protestants. Like, their Democratic Party is nowhere without its core base of black American Protestant Christians who are Bible believing. And so that's one of these things that, imagine sort of the arrogance of saying that a vote for a Republican is faithful and a vote for a Democrat is unfaithful.
What was that, Al Mohler?
Yeah, he just said that last week.
And that's an extraordinary statement when you're talking about millions of Bible-believing Americans who are the foundation of both Democratic parties and the Republican Party.
Didn't he say something very similar to that, I think maybe in the 2020 election cycle, and then somebody asked him, well, what about black
what about
believers?
African Americans?
And
he said they vote the way they vote for historical reasons.
So they get a pass.
They get a pass. We'll let them buy because maybe, they don't know better.
Which is so just condescending.
It's either remarkably patronizing or you haven't thought this through well enough.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to go back to my question, though. Regardless of Christianity, what is conservatism? And is it a thing? And does it exist? Or is it simply a reaction to whenever someone wants to change something that someone doesn't want changed?
Yeah. So
they want to take out the organ. Yeah. I'm a conservative. You're a progressive.
So, yeah. So let's try to parse this as well as we can.
Okay.
With the notion and understanding that I don't know what a conservative is right now. So I'm trying to hang on to that word as meaning something independent of being on the right. So I will say...
Of what?
Well, right and left are oppositional, and they're not necessarily ideologically oppositional. They're politically oppositional.
Yeah,
and so,
okay.
So
is that useful? Is that a useful dichotomy?
It's useful to the extent that it identifies combatants. In the way that...
Are we supposed to be combatants?
No.
Okay, so is it a useful dichotomy?
It's describing something real. But what I would say about conservatism, there's sort of this dispositional conservatism, which is sort of the Chesterton's fence, where somebody might say, oh, look at this fence. It seems to be here for no reason. Let's knock it down. And the dispositional conservative says, if there's a fence here, let's at least figure out why it's here before we knock it down.
A little more risk averse.
A little bit more respectful of traditions and customs. So there's
Who do you ask, though?
Them.
Tucker,
Ask them.
Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, because everyone has a view of why the fence is
Ask
there.
them, Phil. Just
Okay.
ask them.
Okay. You're
So-
not selling me, David. You're not
So there's
selling
a
me.
dispositional conservatism that is going to kind of tap the brakes when somebody says we need to change A, B, and C. You're going to say, let's
Yeah.
slow
Hold
down.
on.
There's an ideological conservatism, which is really an interesting way of describing a specific ideology like classical liberalism. To describe it as conservatism is kind of a historical accident, to be honest, because if you go over to Europe and you say that, you describe conservatism, they're not necessarily going to immediately leap to classical liberalism.
Right.
It's sort of a modern conception of what you might call sort of the Reaganite transformation of the Republican Party, which is limited government,
Maximum individual
much
liberty.
more focus on individual liberty,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Free markets.
Now, to call that conservative is sort of, that's just the name that we gave to
okay.
classical liberalism
Okay.
and free market economics, right?
Right.
And so that's why I say, okay, if somebody asks me what I am and I say conservative, no, that word no longer
Right. So 10 years ago,
self-defining.
15 years ago, it was clear that you were more in a Reagan conservative,
right.
limited
Right.
government, maximum liberty.
Are we in Gulliver's Travels now? Where was it the Lilliputans?
Who's the giant?
I don't know, but like two sides are just fighting over completely arbitrary stuff. I crack the egg on this side, that side, and now whatever that guy does, I'm going to take the opposite point of view just because that's the nature of media these days.
I mean, that is the consequence of what's called affective polarization. In other words, when I have an enormous amount of animosity towards you, then no matter what you say, I'm going to have a strong inclination to disagree.
Right.
Just because Phil said it, and
Right.
I don't like
I don't
Phil.
like Phil's fences.
Yeah. So that affective polarization creates its own set of policies. So, one of the avatars of affective polarization right now is Ron DeSantis. So he has identified enemies, Disney, woke professors,
The Tampa Bay Rays.
diversity consultants,
Immigrants.
He's identified these enemies, and then he's going to use the power of the state, and this is something that was at NatCon that was talked about explicitly, to reward friends and punish enemies. Now, the classical liberal says, whoa, hold on. The idea that we are going to even give the state that power to be that punitive on the basis of ideology, the classical liberal says, nope, that is not. That power should be denied at the state. And then when you have affective polarization, the tendency is then for people on opposite sides to want to get more state power, because if they get more state power, they can inflict it on their opponents.
Right.
And a lot of the NatCon right is just super explicit about that. We want to reward friends and punish enemies because they view that as a synonym of advancing the good and punishing evil. To them, that's the same deal. And so the classical liberal is sitting there going, you know what? This is the logic of religious war. And classical liberalism, to paraphrase a guy who used to write under the pseudonym Scott Alexander, he was talking about how classical liberalism emerged from the wars of religion. Classical liberalism is not some sort of utopian government system. It's like an alien technology for the prevention of civil war. It's how really different people live together. That's what it is. It is not utopian. And then what the people on the wings then say now is, no, we're utopian. Here's how we're going to really create a just society, and but step one involves crushing my enemies. Well, sorry, that's the logic that leads to civil strife. That's the logic that leads
And
to
it's the
religious
rejection
conflict.
of classical liberalism.
So Andrew Sullivan has written, he was citing some sociologists who talked about how every society has sort of a constant amount of religious impulse. I forget the exact language he used. And as America becomes less and less institutionally religious, that impulse has to go somewhere. And he's arguing it's going into our politics.
Yes.
Which is your point of this is what religious wars look like.
Yes.
But instead of Christianity or Protestants and Catholics or whatever, it's right and left, Republicans and Democrats. Is it inevitable that this is going to come to increasing violence?
Over the short term, I'm going to say almost inevitable. Over the long term, I'm more optimistic for this reason.
When you say long term, you mean like on a cosmic level, like
no, not like
the arc of
not like
justice bends, or the arc of
not
history
in the
bends
sense
towards
of like
justice?
Jesus wins.
Whatever
in the
mess we get into, Jesus will eventually
Right.
clean it up.
No, so let me put it this way. We know, and the best social science indicates that a majority of Americans really don't like the state, not just sort of like the inflation or global instability or whatever. They don't like the way we're at each other. A majority of Americans don't. And so...
And it's the other guy's fault.
Yeah. And they don't, and that's across the political spectrum. So 90% of that sniping, that fighting, that fury is being driven by about 25% of America. And so the question that I have is, will that 25% of America continue to drive the bus, or will the 2/3 or plus of those who are the quote-unquote exhausted majority, will they start to kind of awaken from the slumber or move? You know, I think of the exhausted majority. Have you seen that GIF of Homer Simpson retreating into the shrubbery?
The shrub, yes.
That's most Americans when it comes to political arguments now. They're just like retreating into the shrubbery. But if you do that and you stay in the shrubbery, you lose. It's over.
Right. The two uncles left at the dinner party just trashed the place.
Yeah.
So part of the wisdom of the framers in the Constitution was this: they had a view of human nature in which we are flawed, ambitious, unvirtuous people, and therefore we needed checks and balances to keep one another from terrible things. So there's a role for systemic structures to limit how bad things get. But when I look at the way we've structured media, whether cable news or social media, it rewards extremism.
Yeah, for sure.
And then when I look at the way we've structured our politics, with gerrymandering and the two-party system and no ranked choice voting in most places, it rewards extremism in political parties. So all of our structures are built to ferment this animosity, even though most Americans don't want it.
Yeah.
So do we need a fundamental structural change if we're going to begin to move?
If we had more state power, we could change
That's right.
cable news.
I mean, this was George Washington, who had enormous state power after the Revolution, and his virtue led him to surrender it. So, I mean, I don't know if we have that coming our way, of somebody, a leader of that magnitude, but we kind of need it.
I mean, look, what's ending up happening is that the way the system is working, it's creating a narrowing political engagement and intensifying it. So the way market forces are working is that if I don't like the way politics is done, then I'm stepping away as opposed to diving into a structure or an institution that does politics correctly. Now, part of that is an artifact of the reality that we have a two-party system that has done a very good job. About the only thing our two-party system is really, really competent at is eliminating its competition.
Right. It is a duopoly.
Right.
Yeah. So you have a duopoly, and when one or both members of that duopoly become deeply dysfunctional, well, then where are the political institutions that empower an alternative? And the answer is you look around, and you don't see them. And so, for example, one of the reasons why we started the Dispatch was we wanted to create an institution, a new institution that was free of a lot of the maladies that were afflicting right-wing media, hot takes, grievance culture, all of those things. And so we're kind of a part of trying to create the alternative kinds of institutions. And that's going to be a big part of how we pull ourselves out of this mess, because there's been such a capture of the political institutions by the competing extremes. And you look around, and this is something that we see all the time when we're out there interacting with folks. We have folks who read us from the left, the middle, and the right. And one of the things is they say, we don't know what community we belong to.
We hear that all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be institutions to house the newly homeless. And that magnifies their voice, and that magnifies their power.
What if we just stop playing the game where you have to declare I'm a conservative or I'm a progressive. I'm going to have people tweet at me and say, Phil, are you a liberal? You know, it's like, just if it's true, just let us know so we can all, you know, weep and gnash our teeth and go out. It's like, on what issue? On what issue? I'm not trying to be conservative or liberal. I'm trying to be biblical.
Yeah.
And it's going to look different, and you're trying to force it into a grid that doesn't work and is uniquely American.
Well, that's why people got so mad at Tim Keller and have been mad at Tim Keller for years now. I remember he wrote an op-ed, I think it was in 2018 in the New York Times, where he said, biblical Christianity doesn't map exactly into either party.
Right.
People freaked out.
How is that not obvious?
It's completely just to give you a sense of how party platforms, how contingent they are. I'll give you a great example of this. And this isn't one of the big hot button issues, but one of the reasons why we were supposed to vote for Trump in 2020 is if the left got in power, they'd admit new states to the union, and they would alter the balance of power in the Senate.
Yes.
Well, you know, I have a memory longer than a goldfish, to quote Ted Lasso. And so I went and I looked back at the 2016 Republican National Convention platform that Donald Trump ran on. And it was support of admitting Puerto Rico into the union. So now it's what Christians have to do is rally against, wait a minute, these things shift and change all of the time. And then there's another thing, Phil, that I think is really important. When you get partisan, when you become a partisan, you start living and acting like a lawyer. And by that I mean you're always trying to advance your side's point of view. You're minimizing your side's flaws. You're maximizing the other side. And there's a reason why we don't need everyone to be lawyers in America. It's not a great way to live a life holistically. We need more people who are jurors. And what does a juror do? A juror hears from competing sides, hopefully without bias, and then decides on the basis of some really pretty basic principles. And that's when you're talking about biblical justice. Understanding sort of biblical justice in its fullness, I mean, one, that's very complex. It's a lifelong exercise. But that's how we should be filtering these things rather than sort of saying, okay, I've decided that the Republicans are the Christian party or the Democrats are the Christian party, and now I'm their lawyer. And we've just just got all these unpaid lawyers running around advocating for their clients.
It reminds me, Phil knows this. I, with some friends, am taking an improv class.
Oh, nice.
Which is immensely fun. Last night in the class, the instructor, we were doing 3-person scenes, and he said, you know, one of the ways to make a scene very entertaining and lots of fun is pick one person in the scene that no matter what they say, no matter what they do, you're going to have nothing but disdain for them. And pick another person in the scene that no matter what they say and what they do, you are going to adore and affirm.
That's awesome.
And it was hysterical, and it's so over the top, and it's ridiculous, but that's exactly what our public square looks like right now, that no matter how reasonable, intelligent, and thoughtful a view or policy position may be, if it comes from the other side, I have to condemn it and hate it. And it's just madness. It's ridiculous, but it's reality.
I'm going to play the role of Christian Taylor here, who's going to come in and say, guys, what is this? How does this actually affect my life? And what do I need to do differently because of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that I've been urging people, and I'm actually writing about this right now for my newsletter this week, is that I think we need to intentionally cultivate communities of people that are broadly divergent ideologically and broadly of different backgrounds and different points of view. Because a ton of what we call cancel culture, a ton of animosity is actually driven not so much by ideology, but in-group dynamics. So there's this great principle that Cass Sunstein articulated 23 years ago called the law of group polarization. And it's this: when people of like mind gather, they become more extreme. And it's just a natural operation of human nature. So how do you deal with the law of group polarization? Don't gather so much with people of like mind. And now, if that's really hard to do because you live in a bright red area or a bright blue area, seek out the best expression of the opposing side's point of view. Because one of the things you're going to learn quickly is you're going to learn that there's a lot of goodwill, people of goodwill on the other side who've thought of things that never crossed your mind. But here's the way we do it, and I'm much more familiar with conservative world than I am with deep, although I've lived in deep blue areas. I live in my neighborhood's 85% Republican. I grew up in the church. That's, my world. Let's say there's a new idea that comes around. Let's go for a hot button new idea that you've never heard of, critical race theory.
What's that?
You've never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic.
So what you're going to do if you're a conservative, you're going to go and you're going to go to your favorite conservative commentator, and you're going to say, what does Ben Shapiro think about critical race theory? And then whatever Ben Shapiro thinks about it,
That's it.
that's what you think about
Right.
it. Well, if you hear a new idea, one of the things I would urge people to do is first read about the idea from the idea's advocates. Then read the opponents.
But they might change your mind, and you might not fit in your group anymore.
Right, and that's the social dynamic.
Right.
By expanding the social dynamic and expanding your social sphere, you're limiting the power of ideological peer pressure.
What you're welcoming is cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
And most people are allergic to that.
But aren't you, with the Dispatch, creating a group of like-minded people who will now become more extreme?
Well,
And aren't we doing the same thing with the Holy Post?
it's very hard to put this into practice, but because but one thing that I would say about, say, the Dispatch is that we're trying to create a community of people who are inquisitive.
Okay.
Okay. So the goal is to create a value orientation towards curiosity.
I love it.
And that's the kind of community. And when you have a community that's value proposition is towards curiosity and inquisitiveness, what are you welcoming? You're welcoming. So one of the things that a lot of people have said this about the Dispatch, and I did not intend for this podcast to be a commercial for the Dispatch, but a lot of people have said we have the best comment section that they've discovered because we have.
You have to pay to comment.
You have to pay to comment.
That's one way to filter out the trolls.
It's a great practice.
Yes, it is.
But it's left, it's center, and it's right.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean that sometimes people don't get testy with each other.
Yeah.
But because there is no bubble, people are always having to have their ideas are always being tested by somebody of goodwill on the other side, and it creates an ethos. I've seen this when I've been I was on the faculty at Cornell Law School for a while, and I was the only conservative. And
Whatever that means.
yeah,
I
well,
don't
this
even
is
know.
who knows.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2000, it meant something, I thought. But anyway, but you could see the group dynamic change just by there was somebody else in the room, right? And so and as Christians, I mean, this posture of openness and this posture of welcome, that should be default for us.
That's what the church is supposed to be. Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
How do we do that?
We be curious.
We need the value of curiosity.
I love the value of curiosity. That's
Yeah.
my favorite
Put that
value.
on a T-shirt. Is it a fruit of the Spirit? Can we add it? Is the fruit of the Spirit open to amendment?
I think no, but I
With
think
2/3 approval of the states. Yeah.
of the apostles.
Yeah.
when you build a theology around, like Paul says, consider others better than yourself.
Yeah, you
and
want to
the
hear
fruit
their
of the Spirit.
story.
Yes, there is
Yeah.
there is a dignity and
It's
respect for people.
hospitality.
Exactly.
Let's call it hospitality.
There you go.
Is that a fruit of the Spirit?
Okay, David.
It's a virtue.
It's a virtue.
The fruit of the Spirit is not an all-inclusive.
Oh,
list of
okay,
virtues.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yes, charity, hospitality. We can, yeah.
Okay, a few more minutes. I just want to go off the rails here into something
Please.
completely
What
different.
are you doing?
We need a little nerd corner.
Yes,
You
let's
didn't
do
pass-
it.
You didn't pass this
Oh
by
man,
me.
You are not supposed to be here. You are an interloper,
I'm a guest.
carpetbagger.
let's get to it. Now the podcast has started.
Yes.
Yeah.
How much time do you have? Rings of power.
Yes.
Okay. Who do you believe the stranger is?
Okay.
I don't want to have to hate you, but I will.
So look, first thing you have to understand about Amazon Rings of Power is, yes, it has departed from canon. Okay. And part of that is absolutely necessary because the second age of Middle Earth, without getting too much into it, is more than 3,000 years long.
I have not been bothered by the departures they've made so far. I'm happy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think, and it is mainly based on mannerisms, it's Gandalf.
I think you are wrong.
I do not think it is Sauron.
I think
Okay.
it's Jeff
You think
Bezos.
too much hair? Is it because you think they're trying to fake us out? Like they're deliberately planting Sauron-like images and ideas because they're going to surprise us? Because there's a lot of them.
But if you, okay. Now, and I could be all wrong about this because I have my own Sauron theory that's different from that.
Okay.
But anyway, so if you listen to how the stranger talks and compare it with some of the ways that Gandalf talked in the Peter Jackson films. And I'm not saying that the Peter Jackson portrayal of Gandalf is canon or whatever, but there's a lot of similarity there. And there's also kind of precedent for sort of a period of confusion. Because remember when Gandalf the White reappears.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and we do know, gosh, and now your Twitter's going to blow up because I'm going to show some ignorance. I've forgotten exactly when Gandalf comes. So it's a
in the
Maiar.
Third age. Right.
Yeah. So it's a Maiar, comes into the third age. Not a lot of detail about that. You know, how would he have come, etc.
Well, he came on his ship and he was given the ring of fire by seared in the ship.
We are about 2 minutes from putting on costumes and cosplay.
I know. Okay,
good.
So
good.
Okay, here's my thing. I think it makes sense why people would go the Gandalf route. Sauron is also a Maiar.
Yes, he is.
And so it would make sense that when he reemerges in Middle Earth, that he also has some kind of amnesic kind of time. But the more important thing is in the Second Age, Sauron fools a lot the elves and the men into being they're convinced he's Anatar, who this Lord of Gifts.
Yep.
So to be somewhat benevolent is important at this stage. The part that got me in the first episode though is when he lands and he's in that. First of all, the crash site looks like the Eye of Sauron, and then the Harfoot girl, whatever her name is, falls into the fire, and it's cool. Which Galadriel earlier had said the fire gives off no heat because of the evil. So they've already established that cold fire is evil.
So, but here's my question. Who's already deceiving elves and men? Halbrand. In Numenor. Because remember...
But he's already bad. Like, he's already killing people and lying and manipulating. He's almost too... He's like the anti-Aragorn, it feels to me. I wonder if he's either the Witch King or the King of the Dead, who will not... You know, the King of the South who doesn't...
Or the elf that bakes the cookies.
And then... What on earth? Who invited him?
I know. This is just like my improv class where everything you say, I'm going to agree with everything he says. I'm just
bakes the cookies.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay.
But let me ask you this: are you enjoying Rings of Power?
I am enjoying it. Yes.
And not only am I enjoying it, I think it is very faithful to the Tolkien ethos. And also, I will defend this portrayal of Galadriel because this idea that Galadriel, 5,000 years before what we see in Lord of the Rings, is going to be exactly the same.
Right.
No. And in fact, the Galadriel in the Lord of the Rings is it is very obvious that she knows she is prone towards the temptation, towards that sort of, you know, that the very kind of aggressive power that she exerts.
Right, which makes her giving up the offer of the ring that much more meaningful.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm with you. We're just gonna have to
heard. Do you know what I read on Do you know what I read on Twitter?
I'm sure it was true, whatever it was.
The fact that David French likes the new Lord of the Rings shows just how unmasculine he is.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
Which led someone else to say, a fan of the guy who calls out Christian men for not being masculine, led another guy to say, I bet David French is the kind of man that goes to the gym twice a month just to do the elliptical.
Wow.
How often
That's
do you go to the
cold.
gym? And do you pump iron like a real Christian man?
You know, number one, I rarely go to the gym because I do nothing but like all I am doing at home is push-ups. Like I'm just sitting. I don't have time to go to the
really?
gym.
Just push-ups
when I'm just
all the time?
knocking out and running, push-ups.
So you're all about the pecs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously.
That works.
First of all, I bet this guy, whoever he is on Twitter, did not go to Iraq as a soldier.
He was a bodybuilder. He was too busy. He was too busy in the gym.
I don't get the whole.
Well, that was a very clean way of saying what he said about me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. It was. I saw that somebody sent that to me, and I was like, "What?"
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Do we want to wrap it up, or should we talk about Star Trek?
No.
Okay.
We're wrapping it up. We're very grateful, David, that you took some time out of your visit to Wheaton to spend with us.
Oh, this was great. I loved it.
Good to see you in the flesh.
That's great. Great to be with you.
Yeah,
guys.
he doesn't even tell me when you guys record so that I can't show up.
I try to keep them away.
Yeah.
I think you now know
It's
why.
now understandable. I mean, the very notion that you would bring the Keebler elves into this discussion,
What was that? The first age? Which age was the age of the cookie elves?
Although they do make lemmas bread.
you're testing my commitment to the fruit of the Spirit. Yeah.
We best leave now before it goes
How
too
do you
far.
usually wrap these up? I don't.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please support us on Patreon. Go to holypost.com and click support us. And definitely check out the
Dispatch.
Dispatch. Right,
Yes.
where you can pay to leave nasty comments. There is a troll tax
Yes.
for the Dispatch.
And which may or may not be a conservative publication. Nobody knows anything anymore.
But they are curious.
But it's a curious.
Not in that way, though.
What a curious publication you've started,
Yes.
David French.
Yes. And I'll take that in not the way you I'll take that literally, but not tonally.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
French Friday is a production of The Holy Post, featuring David French and me, Sky Gittani. Production by Carla Haskins. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Music and theme song by Phil Vischer. This podcast is made possible by the support of Holy Post listeners like you. To find out how you can become a supporter of the Holy Post and to engage more common good Christian content, visit holypost.com.